I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent Makori in for Hashtag of the Year. It's Monday, October the 18th. This is Africa 54.
Drought in northern Kenya pushes millions to hunger. In Senegal, overfishing leads to hunger and economic devastation. And what will it take for music streaming services to take off on the continent? We'll explain.
We begin in East Africa, where the United Nations is warning that 2.4 million people in northern Kenya will struggle to find enough to eat by November after a second consecutive season in which rains have failed. David Doyle has more.
For some in northern Kenya, their wealth is held in livestock. But under a blazing sun, the work of a lifetime is evaporating. Consecutive droughts are pushing millions of people towards hunger. In the arid terrain of Marsabit County, herder Bigeri is pointing out the animals he's lost.
This is my donkey and it died because of the drought. There is no pasture or water. My donkey has died. Sheep and goats have died too. Only God will help me. If you walk all over this area, you will see my dead animals.
And the situation is getting worse, with climate change expected to increase the frequency and severity of droughts in the region. This is the second season in a row that rains have failed here. What that means, according to the United Nations World Food Programme, is 2.4 million people struggling to find enough to eat by November. Food prices are also climbing, in turn reducing the value of the pastoralists' skinny goats. Herder Moses Loloju volunteers distributing food donations. He says it no longer rains normally, and when it does rain, it's not enough.
We came to receive the aid as we have nothing otherwise. Goats are unsellable, cows are even worse to sell, and our children are starving.
The UN says over 465,000 children under 5 and over 93,000 pregnant and breastfeeding women are malnourished in Kenya's north. Plan International's regional head for disaster risk management, Maurice Onyango, says previous droughts were predictable.
We had longer cycles of 5 to 10 years, and this meant that the pasture and water bodies would regenerate very quickly. This is no longer the case. We are seeing droughts occurring every 2 years, sometimes every year.
Temperatures in northern Kenya have climbed by approximately 1/3 of a degree Celsius every decade since 1985, according to US government data. They are expected to rise further, Washington says, as well as the length of heat waves, making it even harder to grow crops or keep livestock as water disappears.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. In Ethiopia, Tigray northern forces accused the government of launching airstrikes on the capital of Tigray region on Monday. The government denied the reports. Tigrai TV, controlled by the northern region's Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, TPLF, said the attack on the city of Mekelle killed several civilians. A resident of the city told Reuters news agency that one strike hit close to a market behind a hotel. An aid worker and a doctor in the region also said there had been an attack, and a diplomat shared pictures of what they said was the aftermath, including pools of blood and smashed windows, all asked not to be named. Reuters could not confirm the authenticity of the images. Ethiopia's government spokesman Legesse Tulu denied launching any attack. He said, and I quote, "Terrorists are the ones who attack cities with innocent civilians in them, not government." End of quote. Legesse accused the TPLF of killing civilians in fighting in neighboring regions. Reuters was not able to verify any of the accounts in an area that is off limits to journalists. Meanwhile, thousands of Amhara families are fleeing to the town of Dessie from fighting further north of the country. Officials warn the already overcrowded makeshift camps where displaced people sleep in rows in school classrooms will feel further after renewed clashes. The United Nations has said that the Ethiopian government is only letting a trickle of food trucks and no medicine for fuel into Tigray, despite estimates that hundreds of thousands of people are in famine conditions there. A charge the government denies. Hospitals there have run out of crucial medicines. Diplomats are worried that renewed fighting will further destabilize Ethiopia and deepen hunger in Tigray and the surrounding regions. To West Africa now, where gunmen killed at least 30 people in an attack on northern Nigeria's Sokoto state. That's according to a statement from the governor's office. The assault began at a weekly market in Goronyo on Sunday and continued into Monday morning. A local resident and trader told Reuters news agency that there were 60 bodies at Goronyo General Hospital mortuary, while others sustained injuries while escaping. Gunmen across northwestern Nigeria have killed scores of people and kidnapped hundreds more for ransom over the past year. 141 people from Tunisia and Libya in 6 boats disembarked on the Italian island of Lampedusa on Sunday. The Italian police confirmed the number of boats and the point of origin, saying that 4 boats came from Tunisia and 2 from Libya. Lampedusa is located about 145 kilometers from Tunisia and 300 kilometers from Libya. Alarm phone, an international network of volunteers intercepting distress signals and transmitting rescue alerts to local coast guards, said that a boat carrying 31 people capsized between Mahdia and Monastir, Tunisia. 7 passengers were rescued, 2 people drowned, and 22 people were missing. The International Organization for Migration said more than 1,300 people have drowned so far this year. In yet another incident, a Spanish Coast Guard vessel rescued 44 migrants in the Atlantic Ocean on Sunday and took them to the port of Ageniguen in Gran Canaria. The Coast Guard also brought the body of a dead migrant ashore with that group. The Red Cross said all migrants were men from the Maghreb area without giving more information about nationalities. Coast Guards wearing full protective gears and loaded the dead body in a stretcher and assisted injured migrants off the vessel. Data from Spain's Interior Ministry showed more than 13,000 migrants had arrived by sea to the Canaries archipelago up to September 30th, more than double the number in the equivalent period in 2020. In Senegal, overfishing has led to an environmental crisis that is having an oversized impact on small fishermen. Alison Lekogo Fernandez and Mbaye Ndir report for VOA from the Senegalese capital, Dakar.
It is 2 p.m. on Yoff Beach in Dakar. Time for fishing boat Captain Adam Afal and his crew to return to dry land after 10 hours at sea. Their catch this day is disappointing, mostly small fish. That's been the case for months.
It has become very difficult. Sometimes we have to travel up to 100 kilometers to find fish.
Fishing occupies a prominent place in Senegal's economy, contributing 3.2% of the national GDP. More than 600,000 people, roughly 17% of the population, are engaged in fishing, processing, and the wholesale trade. Seafood is a key part of the Senegalese diet. But most of the fish caught in Senegalese waters now are taken by industrial trawlers. The catch ends up as fish meal used to feed industrial livestock. That leaves fewer fish to feed the Senegalese and a dangerous shortage of fish in general. The decline of fish stocks, especially the pelagic species that live in open water such as sardines, and the larger fish that eat them, worries the head of West Africa's Artisanal Fisheries Association, Moussambeng.
Before, there was a scarcity of the main coastal demersal species, which were so-called European species, which were exported. Back then, the coastal pelagics were doing quite well. But today, the situation has worsened with the overexploitation of the main coastal pelagic species.
To preserve the fishing industry, The government has frozen fishing licenses, but enforcing the restrictions has been difficult.
We still have difficulty enforcing the regulations because there are always some people who cheat. They always have an alibi. It's more difficult to find fish we have to eat. But we are obliged to enforce the law despite the difficulties.
The UN says 90% of the world's fisheries are fished out and face collapse. Senegal is an example of the world's problem, and it's a problem with no easy solutions. Alison Legogo-Fernandez for VOA News, Dakar.
Spotify is targeting Africa for growth in music streaming, while the Swedish giant is dependent on mobile phone firms to make payments work. Julian Statterwaite reports.
Spotify reckons Africa could be the next big market for music streaming. It's crucial to the Swedish app's goal of 1 billion users. The problem is how to handle payments on a continent where many people don't have bank accounts. Mobile phone companies may have the answer. In Kenya, Spotify has teamed up with mobile payments app M-Pesa, owned by local network Safaricom. Fiona Okumu is Spotify's head of music in sub-Saharan Africa.
Some parts of Africa, a lot of African countries are unbanked. So that means they don't use credit cards. And this is very true of a lot of East Africa. In Kenya, you use M-Pesa for the most part. So we ensured to make sure that there was that facility so that the fans don't have so many barriers to access to music, which is something we should all be able to enjoy.
Spotify isn't alone in teaming up with phone networks. African rivals such as Nigeria's Boomplay are making similar moves. Content creators seem to welcome the arrival of the streaming firms. Charles Otieno is a music producer in Kenya.
So when it came to Kenya, now we can access Spotify for artists. You can see the logs, you can see how your music is basically growing.
The new products see phone firms selling music bundles that give subscribers access to streaming firms' content. That should boost revenue for performers and subscriber numbers for the streamers.
That was Julian Satterwaite reporting. Now, on a sad note, General Colin Powell, the first black U.S. Secretary of State and former chairman of the military joint chief of staff, died Monday from complications of COVID-19. He was 84. His family announced his death in a Facebook posting. The family said Powell was fully vaccinated against the virus. Powell had multiple myeloma, a white blood cell cancer that suppresses the body's immune response, according to U.S. news outlets. Powell was the country's top diplomat from 2001 to 2005 during the first term of Republican President George W. Bush's administration. Still to come, what four major weather disasters in a U.S. state could tell about the future global effects of climate change. But first, Haiti Adams tells us what comes up on the next Straight Talk Africa.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we're going to look at the Me Too effect on Africa's women.
Sisterhood! Sisterhood! Hear my voice! Hear my voice!
In recent years, the movement against sexual abuse and harassment has helped bring high-profile figures in Hollywood and global politics to book.
To be a woman is not a crime! To be a woman is not a crime!
But how global and inclusive is the Me Too movement? Is it helping or hurting the fight for women's rights and safety in African countries? We'll also look at the role and space for men in the conversation. So be sure to join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
A group of 17 U.S. missionaries, including children, has been kidnapped by a gang in Haiti, according to a voice message sent by a religious group aware of the incident. The Christian Aid Ministries based in the Midwestern state of Ohio sent a message to other missions saying that the 17 were helping build an orphanage and had left the site when they were abducted. The message said that the mission's field director and his family and one other unidentified man stayed at the ministry's base while while everyone else visiting the orphanage was kidnapped. The field director alerted U.S. officials. A U.S. government spokesperson said officials were aware of the report of the kidnapping. The latest kidnapping in strife-torn Haiti comes just days after high-level U.S. officials visited the Caribbean nation and promised another $15 million for Haiti's national police to help reduce gang violence. The effects of climate change are expected to push more than 200 million people from their homes by 2050. That's according to the World Bank. The impacts are already being felt in the southern U.S. state of Louisiana, where 4 major weather disasters struck in a 9-month period.
I didn't want to get upset.
Claire Marceau's home in Cameron, Louisiana, was demolished by Hurricane Laura. A year later, the memories still hurt.
My husband just kept stacking up the cinder blocks. Because what else are you going to do? It's not like you have anything to repair. It's just like it was never there.
Hurricane Laura crashed ashore in August of 2020, causing $19 billion of damage across the region. Just 6 weeks later, Hurricane Delta struck. Then in February, a freakish Arctic blast. And in May, 30 centimeters of rain fell in one day. The city of Lake Charles, 48 kilometers north of Cameron, is still reeling.
If you asked me about climate change 10 years ago, I probably would have said I think that's a bunch of hogwash or some type of made-up agenda. I don't believe that today.
Mayor Nick Hunter adds that thousands remain displaced a year after Laura. With climate disasters ratcheting up worldwide, what happened to Lake Charles demonstrates how the impacts ripple through a community. Hunter says the biggest problem is housing. Nearly half the homes were damaged in Laura and Delta alone. Joyce Nash lives on a street lined with abandoned houses.
My neighbors aren't able to come back because their home isn't livable for them to come back.
Many residents have not returned to their jobs either.
When they're trying to go back to work, they can't go back to work because they have nowhere to live. They have nowhere to live.
Guys, you doing okay?
Kathy Vadrine owns Steamboat Bill's, a popular Lake Charles seafood restaurant. Before the storms, she had about 50 employees.
I need about 30 more people, so if anybody wants a job, it's a senior citizen or 15, we hire them. I had 2 people who lost their house. One's living with the parents. There's so many of them that have moved away.
There just aren't enough workers, and you see that down every street with every business.
Becky Franks is marketing manager with the staffing firm Manpower. She says the whole economy of the city is suffering.
From the perspective of, bringing revitalization back into the community, when the doors aren't open, it's a domino effect.
People in Louisiana pride themselves on their resilience, but the impacts of repeated disasters add up, says Louisiana State University anthropologist Craig Colton.
And each time a storm hits, it drives the resilience of the population further down, and they have farther to go to get out of the depressed state of the economy and their social well-being.
My daughter's name's Gabby. That's what the G's for.
Back in Cameron, Claire Marceau and her family are rebuilding. She knows life here is getting more precarious with climate change, but this is home.
We're not going to be climate refugees. I mean, I guess we already are in some ways, but we're not the only ones. It's a global crisis. It's not just here.
Steve Baragona, VOA News, Cameron, Louisiana.
Afghan businesswomen say that they have been forced to close their businesses as the Taliban have imposed a ban on women working outside. Yelda Bakhtash has the story.
This cafe, owned by an Afghan businesswoman in Kabul, used to host young Afghan men and women for poetry nights, music nights, and social gatherings. However, things have changed since the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. Women are told to stay at home. The cafe's owner, Mina Rezai, says she had no choice but to shut down her cafe.
I
I was afraid that if the cafe is kept open, the Taliban might come and harm my employees and customers. Therefore, I was compelled to shut the cafe because I could not continue to work.
Rezai, who escaped to Paris, says that 5 of her cafe's 8 employees were women who are now unemployed.
The current situation has brought about disappointment, and I don't think that there is any bright future for businesswomen in Afghanistan.
According to Afghanistan Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the majority of women-owned businesses have closed since the Taliban took control of the country.
We have continued really approaching various channels of connections, contacts to Taliban leadership. So we meet and inform them about the gains that women had made in the business sector and how important it is to allow women to resume operation. Because all of these people that I talked about, more than 57,000 formal and informal businesses in the country had created over 130,000 jobs for women. And so this should be very important and as well as acceptable to Taliban and anyone in the country to allow resuming these operations.
Terry Neese, who has been mentoring and educating Afghan business women since 2007, believes that the international community should do more to help them.
Many of these women want to do an online sales, for example, and put a program together like that. That is something that we could do. That's something we could do on the ground in Afghanistan. It's something we could do here in the United States.
Despite the Taliban's vow to respect women's rights, it has placed severe restrictions on women, prohibiting them from working or pursuing secondary education. The United Nations on Monday urged the Taliban to honor their promises to women and girls. Yelda Bakhtash, VOA News, Washington.
Now, recently, a U.S. advisory panel unanimously endorsed booster shots of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine for adults over the age of 18. The move comes as vaccines and public health protocols in the United States remain politically charged issues. VOA's Rasha Rabasadi reports.
Booster shots of the single-dose Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine moved one step closer to approval late last week. Following a U.S. Food and Drug Administration advisory panel's unanimous vote, the recommendation now awaits FDA approval. Advisors mentioned growing concern that the J&J vaccine, as it's commonly called, appears to provide less protection over time than the Pfizer and Moderna shots.
With the data that they're seeing about the waning of immunity, as well as the advantage of boosting people at different age groups. So the data we're starting to see from Israel indicates that even in a somewhat younger group, for example, from 40 to 60, there's a real benefit in getting the booster shots.
Fauci added that the United States will accordingly modify vaccine recommendations. In parts of the country, amid increasing mandates by both public and private employers, there have been protests against vaccine mandates, like at this Boeing plant in Washington state. Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott recently issued an executive order banning mandates, defying calls from President Joe Biden for all companies with at least 100 employees to require a vaccination or undergo regular testing. Republican Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson says he does not support banning mandates by employers, although he opposes mandates imposed by the federal government.
The states are sometimes coming in and saying employers should not have the ability to impose a vaccine requirement on their workers. To me, that's the wrong direction as well. It's not practical in terms of creating that debate, but it's not principled either.
Meanwhile, Friday's FDA panel recommendation would apply to all J&J recipients aged 18 and older at least 2 months after their initial vaccination. The measure follows the White House's plans announced in August for a widespread booster campaign. Arash Arbasadi, VOA News.
The American Red Cross says it is facing a blood shortage. Officials say there have been less than a day of supply of certain blood types. And Leslie Bucklet has the story, narrated by Anna Rice.
This is an American Red Cross blood donation center in Washington, D.C.
This blood donor headed here right after work.
My mother is a nurse, and she gives blood pretty regularly, and she was talking about it, and so I think I just did a Google search. She works at a hospital, but yeah, she mentioned it a few weeks back, and didn't have a lot going on today, so I decided I'll check into it.
Sean Brennan is an American Red Cross honorary blood donor from Memphis, Tennessee. He's been donating blood for more than 3 decades.
It started when, back in the 1990s, a coworker was heading out at lunchtime, and we were just talking, and he happened to say he was going to go donate blood. And I had never done that before. And I asked a few questions, and then a week later, I scheduled an appointment, I donated, and I said, wow, I can do this. So I made another appointment, and then the next thing you know, decades later, I've made my 500th donation.
Despite regular donations from thousands of Americans, U.S. blood banks are short of certain types of blood. According to the Red Cross, the number of blood donors in the U.S. dropped by 10% in August 2021.
We are at the lowest levels of inventory for this time of year since 2015, and we have less than a 1-day supply for certain blood types. Ideally, we would be at a 5-day supply.
Red Cross officials say donors have become less active since COVID-19 restrictions have been lifted, with more people focusing on other things after staying home for so long. Now the rise in Delta virus cases has brought new challenges to blood drive efforts, as well as new restrictions and fears.
We collect at high schools, colleges, sporting events, businesses, and there have been shifts in our ability to collect in these types of venues due to changing restrictions.
Lasky says the Red Cross services about 40% of U.S. hospitals, making any shortages a national issue.
So for me, I've worked here at Carter Blood Care for 13 years. And in that 13 years, my role has been to work directly with the hospitals that we serve and the patient needs that they meet. And I've never seen it this bad.
Both the Red Cross and regional blood banks are encouraging people to donate blood.
We do an arm scrub, quick pinch for that needle stick, and then it's about 5 to 8 minutes that you're actually giving blood. Then you're done. You get a snack, and you've done it.
The Red Cross says it's encouraging people to donate blood as they adjust to new routines and as the agency works round the clock to meet hospital demands for life-saving blood. Felicia Bacalets in Washington, Anna Rice, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.